Um, we start the meetings with these reminders every time, so hope you're not tired of seeing them, but you can also remember the purpose of our work as part of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, a reminder that we're working from the bottom up, we're lifting from the bottom up. That's when everybody rises. And the resources that you can refer to remind yourself of our origin and what we're doing. There's the website for the Poor People's Campaign, just poorpeoplescampaign.org. And then you can dig a little deeper. The fundamental principles are there to check out, and the 14 policy priorities to heal the nation. The thing that I would add or recommend finding, it's a little bigger. There's a PDF of the third reconstruction, which includes all of the policies, good budget information, real details about how do we make this transformation from a war economy to a peace economy, from communities that don't value the poor to protections for everyone, because everyone has a right to live. Some announcement here I want to make before we jump into the focus of our evening. April 2nd, we're going to be having a moral mass march in Raleigh. We're not having HK on J here this year. It's been, I think HK on J is 12 or 13 years of having it. I've only been to about 9 or 10, but I know I missed some. And this year it's not happening. There will be a safe event April 2nd of this year in Raleigh. So it's something to look forward to and plan for. More recent things that are going to happen on the 12th. Here's in Union County Library is having a Confronting Barriers to Mental Health in Communities of Color Zoom. And you can register here. I will put this in the chat because I'm sharing my screen, but you can't get to this hyperlink. So I'll put it in the chat. It might take me a minute to get back to the chat, but I promise I will. And then AMP America has an event on Saturday at 2. And you can do both of these because they're both Zoom events. It's a great thing about Zoom. You can go to something in one part of the state and something in another part of the state or another country. This morning I was on the Zoom.
Apologize. That AMP event should have been 2:30 p.m.
2:30 p.m. Okay. This morning I was on a Zoom with women from Ukraine and Russia. It was wild. Okay, so I will put both of these links in the Zoom so you can do them both. And now, Samantha, would you like to introduce our guest speaker? We're so excited about this.
Okay, so last Saturday I attended a presentation with You Can Vote, and they showed us how, so simply and such a wonderful program, really easily how to register people and make sure their vote, their registration will be processed. So on the Circles Wake the Sleeping Giant canvassing campaign, we want to offer people as much information and access to voting and voting registration as possible. So they'll also give us access to materials to register voters while we're doing the canvassing. So here is Caitlin Metzger from You Can Vote, North Carolina.
Hey, Samantha. Thanks, y'all. Thanks so much for having us or having me tonight. I'm excited to learn about all the things that are happening in North Carolina. It's a lot, right? It's a lot. I thought I would just start and ask for, I don't know if chat is easier or the reaction tab. You can do a funny face or a celebration face or something. Has anyone, who in this room has done voter registration before in North Carolina at any point for any reason? Okay, I see a couple. So I see a thumbs up. I see a high five. Okay, couple folks. looking in the chat too for folks where it looks like there's some variation of location. You guys are across North Carolina, right? Has anyone heard from a voter or talked to a voter who is just not quite sure about voting and doesn't know what the big deal is and maybe doesn't think it's important or doesn't think it matters? You can do the chat or thumbs up or any kind of reaction if you've had that experience, if you've talked to someone before. I see one, I see two. George is laughing maybe. Okay, couple thumbs up. Okay. Cynthia's thumbs up. All right. I asked that to get a sense with what your experiences have been so far. And I'm happy to share what we've learned and what we see succeeding out talking to voters. Let me just take 1 minute to say that You Can Vote is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. We were founded in Durham, North Carolina in 2014 as in somewhat response to the monster law that happened in 2013, which is when multiple things happened, bad things happened to make voting harder. And so we started this as a campaign without a candidate. We started this as a way to ensure that people knew you can vote. That's the name of the organization. That's our branding. That's everything that we focus on is you can vote as long as you know the latest. And unfortunately in North Carolina, it takes a lot of energy to know the latest, right? It takes a lot of energy to keep up. It takes a lot of energy and time to know what are the voting laws this year. Something always pops up, something changes every year. And so we've seen a real need for this kind of just basic 101 type simple messaging. And our whole program is built on the premise that people do want to vote and people know it's important generally. Even if they're not enthusiastic to vote, they most of the time see that why it's important. And it kind of goes off in two major ways from there. Either they know it's important and they just can't keep up, right? They don't know about voter ID. They don't know what's on the ballot this year. They might not know, they might show up at an early voting site that they voted at before. It's no longer an early voting site. They kind of get, they go down the maze a couple different ways and might get barriers or kind of some stumbling blocks that keep them from voting. There's another group of people who know it's important, or maybe know they've been told it's important, but don't quite see how and don't quite see why. And a lot of that, some of that is from, the fight for fair maps and people feeling like we live in a gerrymandered state and it doesn't matter. Another portion of people have seen, multiple types of elected officials either make promises and not keep them, or say they were going to do something, but not actually having the power to do that. That happens a lot, right? But what we're finding and what we have found for the past several years and continue to be validated is that generally, if you just meet people where they are, if we're just meeting people respectfully, if we just use information and use messaging that is actually helpful, that is not preaching to them, that is not overwhelming them, that is not making the huge case that this is the best thing you've ever done. What we also know from the data is that voting is a habit. And so if you can get someone in the habit of voting, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily enthusiastic voters, right? But we know that just like teeth cleaning, once you get in the habit, you're in the habit. And so once you're in the habit of voting and you can vote 3 times successfully, almost always that means you're a lifelong voter, almost always. And so what we've seen, what we really put a lot of energy on at You Can Vote is making sure that especially first-time voters, that is, young people who are turning 18 every day, that is new citizens who are getting their citizenship rights, that is people returning home who are gaining their voting rights upon completion of a felony conviction. All these kind of folks who might not think it's important or think it's important but don't know they're eligible. And even more so, they know it's important and they're very motivated but get stopped along the way for one of the many things that can stop you along the way. So that's kind of who we are and where we're coming from. I do want to thank Samantha for inviting me here today, and I'll share a couple slides here in a second. But generally, I just want you guys to know that, you know, our main mission and our main goal is always based on more people voting and more people participating means that our democracy is stronger. It means that our democracy is more inclusive, the more voices that participate. And on a very base level, on a very metric number of levels, once you get in the habit of voting, you're voting. So if we can really invest in young people and really make sure that folks who are moving to North Carolina, we've all seen exponential growth in your communities of new North Carolinians. If folks can get into the habit, then they'll be with us, right? And so we know that democracy is healthier when all people vote and when all people are represented. So I'm gonna put one thing in the chat actually before I get going. And this is, let me just show it to you actually. I will put it in the chat and then I'll screen share here in a second. Let me get the right thing pulled up. Of course, my screen. I can type it in the chat. Oh, there it goes. All right, so this is from our website. Copy and paste. This is youcanvote.org/local. And let me share as well. All right. All right, oops, I can see all your faces. Let me minimize that. All right, so this is one of our pages on our website that I think is the most, if you take away one thing about talking to voters and one thing about listening to voters, this is a great tool for you. Because what we've done over the past couple of years is listen to people and hear from people about what they care about. One way to look at it is money, tax dollars. People want to see more output and more kind of services, right? Services for you and your community. We are putting in a lot of money, we pay a lot of taxes, and so we want to see things happen. So one way to think about this and one way to kind of visualize this for a voter is to think about the life cycle of a ballot. So here you have your ballot. Here's a couple issues, and these are all clickable. I'll let you click through them at your own, on your own time. But basically, generally, if you talk to a voter and ask them, what do they care about? What are they interested in? They might say one of these things: criminal justice, civil rights, climate change, healthcare, education. There's more, right? Jobs, housing, the economy. There's lots of different ways to think about issues that people are motivated by. But generally, folks mention one of these or something related to this. And so we made a visualization here that if this is how you see your ballot, these are the issues being decided on by the folks on your ballot, then you make that ballot and make your choices. What that results in here are some federal and state and local election results. Those results turn into real people. Those are our elected officials. And this is all clickable. Again, I'll say click through this when you have more time separately. But once you have these federal and state and local officials, those are the folks who lead our agencies, our policies, our laws. Those are people who lead the State Department. They lead the housing department. They lead education department. They also lead our local government. They're people like the governor, lieutenant governor. They're people who appoint people who are in charge of our systems and infrastructure. I think a really easy example right now, a lot of people are paying attention to health and human services as we are living through a pandemic. You know, the governor is elected, but his person who's in charge of HHS is appointed by the governor. So that is one example of a system, infrastructure. The policies are put in place by these elected officials. And so lots of different people, once someone is elected, lots of other people surround that person and are in positions of power. Then you see here your tax dollars, right? We kind of infiltrate here again with our input. This is people who have to pay federal and state taxes. And what that really turns out to, in the most basic way, is services for you and your community. So if you live in a part of the state that has a rural hospital and they recently closed, and your only service available for COVID testing is at a drive-through clinic, a pop-up clinic, and there is no actual structural hospital anymore, you feel that, right? And you see that. You might not exactly know why and all these other steps that had to happen for your rural hospital to close, but that is one example of a real life, you can see it and feel it, that a service that was available to you is no longer available, right? And it's not just about the tax dollars. It's also about all these decision makers along the way. Agencies, leaders, policies were put into place, potential laws were changed. And so you did make one output here for your ballot, you made another output here for your tax dollars, but what you got in return might not be good enough. It might not be sufficient for you. Another great example is our education system, right? We're in the middle of a big case in North Carolina about public education. Even if you don't have kids in public education, you are impacted by what's happening in our school systems. And the result of all of these different choice points along the way results in services for you and the children that are in public school. So it's, this is one way. Again, it might not stick for every single person. And generally when you're talking to a voter, you don't go into this much detail. But this is one way to think about it and one way to look at it visually. I'm going to keep scrolling here and talk a little bit more about the other elected officials we're going to see on the ballot this year. One is mayors and city councils. Many places, including our big cities and multiple of them in North Carolina, didn't get a chance to have municipals last year based on a change of, a delay in the census. And so those elections are going to be tacked on this year. Everyone's going to see county commissioner. Those are your board of commissioners locally. And the major thing that they do is pass a budget, a local budget, right? We have federal money and it is flowing down to the state level. We have a state budget and it flows locally. And those county commissioners make a lot of decisions about what is available to you, including early voting. The county funds the county board of elections. And so if you have seen a decrease of early voting or an increase of early voting, that is because you're a line item on a county commissioner's budget. Public health is a major one. I talked about that a little bit already. Safety, human services, mental health services, all of these are places that are run by your municipal county government. School board members, probably you know about this. It's getting a lot of press. A lot of people are paying attention to school board members. Those elections are happening this year. These are people, generally it used to be, regular folks who you might run into the grocery store. These are what I would call pretty approachable, right? You're probably not going to run into the governor. You're not going to run into the president at the grocery store. You might run into your school board member, right? You might run into your county commissioner. These are really localized officials, but they have major power and they make major decisions that impact you, regardless of whether you have a child in public school. Sheriffs and DAs, this is another kind of, two offices that is getting more and more attention because folks are really coming around to the fact that these are elected officials. Now that's not true of all states, right? But in North Carolina, we have 100 counties and every county has a sheriff. That's an elected official. These are very important people who make a lot of decisions, who you may or may not agree with, but these are people who are elected to manage the county law enforcement agency. They provide security in the jail and in the courtroom for all of us. They oversee the daily conditions of the jail and the inmates in their custody. They get to make decisions about who can come and go. We are aware of this because at my nonprofit, at You Can Vote, we actually visit jails and help folks get registered who are eligible. That has changed a lot, right? Because of the virus, and there are less people allowed, if anyone is allowed to visit, because there is a lot of danger in these spaces. And that is one thing, overseeing the daily conditions of the jail, that your sheriff is in charge of. District attorneys, this is another one that is really impactful when you're talking to a young voter or a new voter especially. These are people who are elected and they get to decide what crimes to prosecute, whether a person will be prosecuted and on what charge. And then very importantly, if someone is diverted into a special program. And so again, if there are programs available in your county, like driving school, or maybe it's drug treatment program, or there's a number of different programs that might be offered. If those are available to people, the district attorney can make a decision and say, does this person need to be charged with a crime and sent to jail? Or can they be diverted into one of these, maybe a treatment program, or maybe a school of some kind, or take a class or something like that. So again, that's just one example. What you've seen here is a little bit of a snapshot, but it's going to be a long ballot this year. And so I've just given you, I think, 5, 6 offices that you're going to see in 2022. But a lot of voters across North Carolina, they might see upwards of 20 different offices. So if folks know of other ones, I'm happy to hear that, and we can talk more about those offices later. But I just wanted to kind of start with what's at stake and what we're facing in 2022. What we know for sure, even in the midst of a change of election day, the primary might be moving. There's litigation happening. There's multiple litigation cases happening about the maps, about photo ID, about multiple things, as always in North Carolina. So some things might change, right? And we can always expect that. This is North Carolina, things change every year. What we know for absolute sure is that when we vote in the primary, and certainly when we vote in November, that this is what you're going to see. You will see multiple offices this year that are mostly local, but make major decisions. And I can almost guarantee, I feel confident to guarantee that you're interested in these offices, and that when you're talking to voters, and especially when you're talking to young voters who might not know who their school board members are, they might not know who their sheriff is. It's really important to approach them and meet them where they are. And don't go on a rampage and kind of preach like I'm tending to do right in this moment. But meet them where they are and say something like, what do you care about? Because if they care about climate change, they might want to hear about their local mayor's decision to, make sure that local waterways are clean. They might want to hear about, whether there's more bike lanes available, or whether they're putting hurricane prevention measures in place on the coast. Those are all local decisions that impact climate change. That's just one example. So I will briefly, I'm just going to scroll here to show you. This page goes on and on and on. I'm not going to bore you too much. But if someone tells you they're interested in education, that's a starting place to have a conversation, right? If people tell you that they're interested in civil rights, that's a starting place to have a conversation. So don't feel like when you talk to voters that you have to cover all these topics. What we really want to see is get registered if you're eligible, and then have a small conversation, just kind of get that conversation started to move people a little bit closer to participating. Maybe they've already voted and they're a lifelong voter. Maybe they're ready to consider running for office. Maybe they're considering joining a local board. Maybe they want to go to an early voting meeting and talk about options for voting to their county board of elections. There's lots of ways to participate and lots of ways to take one more step towards civic engagement. Voter registration is a big part of that, but it's not the only thing. So I just want to kind of lay that groundwork, if that's okay. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and open my other slides. I will pause. Let me just pause actually for questions or anything that you need me to go a little bit more into about that first part. And I'll look at the chat, or if you want to come off mute, that is okay with me.
Caitlin, I just have a quick question. Do we have any plan, does anybody have any plan on distributing something simple for voter ID to facilitate that for people?
Yes. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is, it will depend. It will depend on if we see what we see from the General Assembly, if the court mandates something, if the General Assembly passes a different law, which is possible. The County Board of Elections to some degree is going to be impacted because at least the latest law mandates them to offer free IDs to folks. And so they have a program about how to do that. There's also multiple organizations, and we will participate if that does come back to make sure that people know the latest and know what's acceptable. Let me say, photo ID is not required in North Carolina at this time. It's gone, it's been back and forth for years, and does tend to change at the last minute. So it's a great question, but at this time, nothing is required. And if something changes, we will respond. All right, I see. Sherry registers students every year. Perfect. Okay, would love to talk with you, Sherry. Okay, any other questions before I keep us moving? Okay. All right, well, let me X out of this. And I will, I'm gonna start right where we left off. Local elections matter. So these are some of the slides that we show on our bigger presentation. We do a fuller voter registration training, and we offer that several times a week. If you're interested, please come out. But what I'd like to show next is just kind of how we talk to a voter, the flow of the conversation, including the actual form. I think it's really important that if you're going to be talking to voters, whether you're canvassing, door knocking, whether you're working, tabling, clipboarding, whatever, the form has changed a bit. And so I just want to make sure that you're super familiar with it and make sure that you don't accidentally tell someone the wrong thing. So local elections matter. This is what I just covered. These are some of the offices that you're going to see this year. The fridge card is You Vote's most popular print piece, and we're kind of holding off on printing these in mass because this is still a question mark. The primary election currently is set for May 17th, but depending on what happens with the maps, and we're waiting for litigation to really feel final, that date might change. And so when we're good to go, these will be available to you as long as you're doing nonpartisan work. We will have these available as one resource of a print material that you can distribute. So a couple things you'll notice here on the front side, we have the primary day, we have the election day. We also have early voting for the primary. Again, that might change, so don't hold me to it. But when we get these printed, it will be up to date with the latest. One huge piece of the education for voters in North Carolina is that primary elections decide who's on the general election ballot, right? Most people know that part. What a lot of people don't know is that the unaffiliated voters, which is the fastest growing group of voters in North Carolina, that unaffiliated voters can still vote in the primary. We have a semi-open system. What that means is if you're unaffiliated, if you're registered unaffiliated, if you don't want to pick a party, you can still go to vote in the primary. And what happens is you just check in, as you always do, and they'll just ask you, which ballot do you want? We have 3 recognized parties in North Carolina. As long as there's a primary in those 3 parties, you get to pick which one you want. Sometimes there's only 2 parties because there's not always candidates in that 3rd recognized party. But that unaffiliated voter has the option, right? And so as long as you're registered to vote, you can vote in the primary. If you're registered with a party, that's the ballot that you choose, or that's the ballot that you use, and you don't get the choice. If you're registered unaffiliated, you just get to choose which one you want. Another huge piece of our education lift this year is that 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the general, and so that date's not moving, that is November 8th. If people are 18 on or before November 8th, they can vote in the primary while they're still 17. And so that is very important because you heard me say a second ago, if people vote 3 times, they're going to be a lifelong voter, right? If we can build that habit. Well, there's some people who are 17 right now today who will be 18, and they have the chance to vote twice already in 1 year, this year. And so that gives them a great advantage if we can build this habit, if we can get folks comfortable voting, that they're already 2 steps forward, right? They already got 2 votes this year. All of us have the chance to vote for 2 times. We all can vote in the primary and the general, but I think it's especially important to know if you're talking to young people or talking to new voters, to make sure that you know, so you can share with them that they're eligible as long as they're eligible. The other side of the fridge card has very basic information, and I'm going to show you this more in depth here in a second, but this is just to show you, this is the front side, this is the back side. This is kind of the size of a postcard, if you think of that. And we'll print these in mass as soon as we feel a little bit more sure when the primary is going to be. All right, so quickly, the 2022 message, this is what we see and what we're focusing on. We are coming off of a big election in 2020 where we saw historic turnout, meaning historic registration. Almost everyone in North Carolina who is eligible to vote is registered to vote. Let me say that again, because some people are surprised. Almost everyone who's eligible to vote is already registered to vote. What they might need to do is update their address. They might have moved, they might have changed counties, they might have changed their name, something like that. But generally, on a shift or whenever you're doing this work, almost everyone you talk to is already registered. But this is in all caps. Many people don't know there's an election coming up. And so that again is the education lift that we're doing. Getting registered is one step, but do you know what's on the ballot? Do you know what offices we're voting for? Do you know there's an upcoming election? 2 elections this year in 2022. So it's that conversation that we need to be having so that eligible voters who are already registered, they still need this message. They still need the information to vote. What we're doing at You Can Vote is a Pledge to Vote program. We know that because we started it last year, we kind of piloted it, but we also have read the data and we know that pledging to vote can increase turnout, especially for young voters. It's not the thing where they have to fill out their own postcard and mail it to them. I know some groups are probably going to do that again. We are just taking a regular piece of paper, a regular clipboard, and having people put their first name, last name, and cell phone number. They can add their email if they want. But basically, we're going to do a text GOTV program to our pledgers. And I'll show you that on the website if you want to help us to collect pledges. But this is not something where we're going to, text them every time something changes. We're not going to text them every single time they live in a new district or something. This is just to help people remember, hey, it's time to vote. And so again, most people that we talk to are already registered. What they need is the latest information. And because that's constantly changing, especially right now, it's in February. If you talk to someone today and say, mark your calendar for May 17th, and that changes, but we don't get their information to update them, we're really doing them a disservice because we've accidentally told them the wrong thing. We told them what we knew at the time. Of course, that is true as far as I know, May 17th. But it could change. It's already changed once or twice. It's already changed twice. So, we're not even 6 weeks into the new year, right? Who knows what's going to happen? All right. So, talking about uncertainty again, I just want to reiterate. Generally, when you're talking to a voter, you don't want to get into the weeds of every single thing. You don't want to go kind of down the winding rabbit hole of all the things that might change. Even the way that I'm talking to you is not really how you want to talk to a brand new voter. You do want to remain positive and not add to the confusion. So sometimes, when you hear something like I just said, the May 17th date is sure as I know, but it might change. And so if you say that to a person who's never voted and they might be a little bit nervous, or they might be moving, they're not sure what their status is of their registration. And just a small little nugget in their mind might say, wait, did she say, do we vote in May? And then they're unsure. And then that actually does harm. What we want to do is keep it simple, stay on message. Let's get you ready to vote. That means let's get you registered properly. That means take the pledge. And that means we're going to vote this year. Do you know what's on the ballot? And that's it. Simple message. Talking about low turnout depresses turnout even further. This, again, we know from the data. We also know from having thousands of conversations with people that if you talk to a voter and they say something like, yeah, I'm not going to vote because it doesn't really matter. And you say, yeah, it really doesn't. Unfortunately, turnout is so low that, whatever, you fill in the blank with something. That doesn't help them get motivated to vote, right? And what we know is nobody wants to go to a party that no one's at, right? And so if all we do is talk about how low voter turnout is, that's not going to motivate people who are either on the fence or not sure or whatever. So again, stay positive and stay with what they need to know. What does that individual voter need to know to vote in 2022? When in doubt, collect the pledge, right? Inevitably, something will change between now and May. Collect that pledge. All right, so I'm going to run through the form and just make sure that folks are familiar with it. This is who's eligible in North Carolina. You do have to be a US citizen. You have to be 16 or 17 to pre-register, as long as you know you're 18 by the time election day comes. Remember, 17-year-olds who will be 18 can vote in the primary. To register, you have to have lived at that address for at least 30 days before election day. And so it's February. They're certainly going to be living there for 30 days between now and November. This really only, you need to pay attention to this if you're doing registration in September or October, right up until the deadline. And then not currently serving a felony sentence. This is important, again, because this is specific to North Carolina. The only people who temporarily lose the right to vote in North Carolina are those with a felony conviction, and they only temporarily lose it while they're serving that sentence. So people who are charged with, convicted of, or even serving time of a misdemeanor never lose the right to vote. Let me say that again. People who are charged with, convicted, or even serving time right now in jail for a misdemeanor, they never lose the right to vote. As long as they're also a citizen and of age and a North Carolina resident, they're eligible. Someone who is temporarily not eligible is someone who has been convicted of a felony and is still on that sentence. So that could be jail or prison, that could be probation or parole. But once that is done, once you're done with that sentence and off papers, you're eligible again, as long as you meet these other criteria. So that's a major piece that you need to know. There's a lot of misinformation about this. And it's important that you know the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony. When in doubt, take the pledge. And also it's on our fridge card. The eligibility is on the fridge card, and I'll show you it's on the form too. So if you ever run into a voter who you share this information with and they're a little unsure, or they don't know if that's true because maybe they were told something else, it is actually on the form. So I'll show you in a second here. So let's get to it. This is the top part. Oh, I think I skipped one. Oh yeah. All right. So this is what the form looks like. What you'll notice, I hope, is that there are some red bolded areas that are kind of this pink background. That's all required. So if you scan a form and this part is missing, or this part is missing, you know it's incomplete. So hopefully your eyes, kind of fall to the highlighted sections. Let's start at the very top. Oops. Oh my. Here we go. This is box 1. Again, here's the citizenship question. You have to be a US citizen. So this answer has to be yes for them to be eligible. Will you be at least 18? Almost everyone says yes, unless you're talking to a pre-registrant, who they will mark no here, and then yes for this one, that you're at least 16 and understand that you're 18 to vote, okay? Provide your full legal name, last name, first name, middle name. This is important because last name comes first, and some people who don't pay attention or just don't notice this type is so small. It's last name, then first name, then middle name. I will urge people a couple times to please write legibly. And one way to ensure that is to ask people to write slowly and also to write in all capitals. Because an actual human, a real person, has to read your handwriting. And so if you just write, blah, if you write wild, they're not going to be able to read your handwriting. Okay. Box 3 is required, and the date of birth is required right here. It's this highlighted section in red. What you'll notice is that there's other things that people can add. The voter can put more information, their driver's license number, the last 4 digits of their social. That is helpful for the Board of Elections. So I generally ask people, most people know the last 4 digits of their social. That just makes sure that the Board of Elections registers the right voter, right? If you're talking to Bob Jones, there's a lot of Bob Joneses in this state. So one identifying number or one additional identifying number here can be helpful. It's not required though. So only date of birth is required. Address here in box 4, this is required. Of course, we have to know where you live so they can assign your districts. This cannot be a PO box in box 4. This has to be an actual residential address. For folks who might be experiencing homelessness or might be kind of transitioning between homes, they can actually use this map. This is on the form, and they can actually draw and mark where they stay most of the time. Because we live in districts and we do have to assign that person somewhere residential address, That's one way to do that if you're talking to a voter who doesn't live in a house or at a residential address. So that's box 4. So you either fill this out or you use this box and then use this box as well. And it says here too, but it's very small type. Or it says right here, you should also provide a mailing address. All right, so let's go to box 5. Almost always you check yes here. This question says, do you receive mail at your residential address? Almost everyone gets their address or their mail from this address. So if you mark yes, you're all good. If you don't get mail where you live and you mark no, then you have to fill out a mailing address. So this is where you can put a PO box or a family member's address. Maybe you're a college student and you never check your mail. You might want to put a different address down for mailing. This can be in another county, another city. It can actually even be in another state. And so the mailing address can be anywhere as long as they reliably get mail. The residential address, box 4, has to be North Carolina, and it has to be where they consider home, the voter considers home. The next section is optional and demographic. So box 6, you'll notice here, I would encourage people to fill it out as much as they feel comfortable. It's not required. And of course, not everyone sees themselves represented here. So don't force anyone or don't kind of pressure anyone to fill it out, but it is helpful. The Board of Elections likes to know who they're registering. And when court cases happen and we get decisions that say African Americans were targeted with surgical precision, this is the data that it comes from. So again, it's helpful. We want to know how many people of certain races and ethnicities live in certain districts, but it is absolutely not required. And you should not put any pressure for folks to fill it out if they don't want to or don't feel comfortable. Box 7, this is political party. Again, I will reiterate again, we are a nonpartisan organization, and that means if you're working a shift with us, you cannot hint or tell people or encourage people to register a certain way. That is always a best practice for any organization. Voter registration, just the activity in and of itself, should be nonpartisan. However, I know a lot of groups are partisan and do this work. So let me just say one thing that is always true. This is up to the voter. And if you're working with us, you do not recommend anything or tell anyone what to do. What you should know, as I mentioned earlier, most people choose unaffiliated right now. We are seeing big growth in the unaffiliated voter category. That has to do with them, people are tired of the parties, and political parties people are tired of that. And this is not a required section. So if you leave it blank, if you're just in a hurry or if someone doesn't want to decide on the spot, they can leave it blank. And if you leave section 7 blank, you'll be assigned unaffiliated. So that's rapidly growing. And then the very bottom of the form, phone number, we think about this as required. It's not technically required, but critical because, as I mentioned, handwriting, a lot of folks might have scribbled or can't, we can't legibly read it. The Board of Elections might not be able to. They will actually call you and say, is this your address? Is this a 3 or is this a 6 or whatever? So phone number is really important. The Board of Elections wants to be able to contact you. And so we think of that as required. And then the last part is box 10. This is required as well. Of course, the voter has to be the one marking the form. So if you're helping someone fill out the form or, helping a family member even, at this point, definitely by box 10, you have to hand them the form and it has to be the mark of the voter to sign. You cannot sign on behalf of someone else. Now, this is where I mentioned a minute ago that the eligibility is. This is in teeny print. On the real form, it's very hard to read, but I do just want to bring your attention that it is here. And so if someone says that they're not eligible and you have a respectful conversation and realize that they are actually eligible, this is where you can assure them that this is their eligibility to vote in North Carolina. And so it says, by signing this, you're attesting that you are a US citizen, you're at least 18, you live in North Carolina, you're not going to vote anywhere else, and you're not convicted of a felony. If you have been convicted, you're completed the sentence. So it's a little bit more, this is more words that I'm saying right now because I'm trying to simplify it a little bit. But basically it's saying exactly what I just told you. You're a US citizen, you're 18 or you're pre-registering, you live in North Carolina, and you're not currently on a felony sentence. That's it. All right, so this is a couple more resources for you, and then I'm going to be quiet and stop talking. A couple resources and putting it together. When you think about talking to a voter, whether you're motivating them to register, whether you're motivating them to vote, whether you know that they're super excited to vote and want to offer one more thing they can do right now, today, which is pledge to vote, right? Here's a couple things to remember. Why vote? The issues that people care about are on the ballot. It's on us as people who are talking to voters to learn about what's on the ballot, learn about the powers and the duties of those offices, and help people make those connections. So again, if they're worried about criminal justice, you get to vote for DA. If you're worried about the cost of education or what school is, what's being offered at your local school, school board members, the entire legislature. We have a US House race, every single district in North Carolina. There's lots of offices on the ballot. And so again, I just gave you a snapshot, but there's tons of information here on our website. If folks have want information about who are these people, right? Who are these candidates? I will say that we don't know the candidates yet because candidate filing had to pause, but Vote 411, which is run by the League of Women Voters, is a great resource for folks who want to read side-by-side comparisons. They do a great job with candidate questionnaires. And so that will be live in time for the primary, whenever the primary is. So Vote 411, that is specific to North Carolina. And it will have, you put in your address or your zip code and it says, these are all the candidates that you get to choose from. And you can really deep dive into who the people are. Knowing your rights allows you to empower yourselves and others. I kind of mentioned this a minute ago, but if you are already registered and you already know your plan to vote, your job is to empower others, right? Empower yourself so that you can empower others. That means nonstop, all the time. Don't wait until November. Folks need to be talking about this, and not even just until November, every single year. What we know is that every year is an election year. And as we get closer to another presidential in 24, a lot of the air gets taken up by presidential races, right? Or maybe Senate race this year is a good example. But there's a lot of other things on the ballot. And we want folks to know not only are they on the ballot this year, but again in 2 years and again in 6 years, right? Like there's a lot of opportunity to vote. And so we want folks to understand that and to empower themselves and their communities. And then we have a training docs section of the website. I'll drop this in the chat in a second, but basically everything I just showed you is on our website times 100. There's a lot of information there. And so if you're going, specifically to a senior center or to a military base or talking to the LGBTQ community, if you're talking to a specific community and you want some, kind of key tips and pro tips, we have a guide for that. And so mostly it's the same information. It's the basic information that I'm sharing with you, but there are some special considerations for certain constituencies. And so that is available to you. All right, last slide. If you want to get involved even more, if you want to either become a volunteer with us or just have us do a presentation, or if you want to donate, or if you want to sign up for an event, all this information is here. Again, I'll drop it in the chat and I can share these slides with you guys as well, but all this is on the website. So it is available and ready for you. Thank you guys so much for having me. Again, I'm Caitlin Metzger. I'll put my email in there as well in the chat if you have questions, and I will stop sharing and see if you have questions in the chat. Oh, I see one, Diane. Yeah, for folks who are experiencing homelessness, yeah, we have done that. And again, remember there's that special section on the voter registration form. And so folks can just actually draw or mark where they live. But there's also a specific guideline. Let me put that in the chat. we have information that might be helpful if you're talking to folks who are experiencing homelessness. But yes, to answer your question, yes, we will go to places where folks might need a little bit of help and might need a little bit of special attention to make sure they get it right. So that's the handout page. I'm also going to share the what's on the ballot. And I don't see any other questions. Are there other questions that folks either want to raise off mute or put in the chat?
I think you covered it, Caitlin.
Okay.
We've got this down. We're motivated.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Thank you so much. Oops.
George,
I'm going to put my email in here as well. And then if you have questions, you can always reach out. But yeah, thank you so much for having me, and glad to know that was helpful. And hopefully we'll see you around empowering voters in North Carolina.
absolutely.
I have a question.
Okay.
I have a question, Cynthia. This is Cynthia. Hello?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay. I had my hand up. I don't know what's wrong with my hand
Oh.
feature. It falls off for some reason.
Oh, I didn't see your hand. Okay,
My
go ahead.
question is, I believe, and I'm not sure if it was, I'm pretty sure it was You Can Vote that I met with Kate many years ago, back in 2017. And she actually provided a referral for doing registrations. She referred us to the Homeland Security at that time to register new citizens. They did a swearing in of new citizens. So my question is, does You Can Vote have a referral source? So for instance, if there's a group or a church or, some organization that, they don't want to just go, they don't know where to go, but they'd like to volunteer to do or sign up. Do you do that type of thing?
Yeah, I would say, a couple things. Anyone can come to our volunteer training. If you're in North Carolina, you can connect with one of our local offices. We've expanded and we have reach across with staff and volunteers and we have college students as well. Our reach is in about 60 counties now in North Carolina. So we are spreading and we are available. And so I think, the best thing to do is just reach out and we'll decide what the best next step is. It might be that one of us comes to the event. It might be that we are not in that county, but we know about another organization that does cover that county. Okay. For new citizens specifically, I think the League of Women Voters often does those events to offer voter registration. Yes. But we've done those too. And so, if the opportunity is there and you want to invite us, we are happy to help.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. And thank you, Samantha, for inviting me. I know you guys have more business to get to, so I'll probably hop off and let you get to it. But, thank you again for having me and let us know if we can do anything for you in the future.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch. I'll be in touch with you. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoy your night.
Night. Okay, it's 7:30. I wonder if we could quickly get that agenda back up. George?
Is there something I should be highlighting? No? Aha, select canvas date. You're talking and muted, friend.
I'm sorry, there's children making noise. I was looking at the second to last weekend in February, possibly. If anybody's available for the 19th or 20th or the 26th or 27th, we'll set up our first date and get moving. I'll find some partners for us on the ground. I've got list from Andrea Miller and Center for Common Ground in 10 different zip codes in Mecklenburg County. So I'm going to put out a list, a document, a form to fill out. And if anybody has a preference for the date, please let me know.
Are there any announcements? Anyone on the Zoom have announcements to make that we haven't already mentioned? Well, if we have nothing else, we're done.
Perfect. Okay, we'll be sending a follow-up out and save the chat if there was. Let's get back to the main menu. Let me save the chat. Okay, anybody have any questions or anything to add? Everybody's tired, done for the day? It's been a long day. I've been on Zooms all day.
I have another at 8, but I appreciate having a break between.
Okay.
All right, take care, people. Many
Good night,
blessings.
everybody. Thank you.